So we wanted to, I wanted to rearrange the first thing I wanted to do is rearrange the meeting. So we would begin with the volunteers. And just we have two volunteers with us today. And Linda, were you going to do this in lieu of Tamara, or am I?
She didn't talk to me about it, so it's a surprise to me.
Okay, great. Tamara's in the airplane. She said she was going to be here and that her plane was landing at 7 o'clock. So we are so excited. We finished this. Let me just give you a little background. We finished this survey, and we had about 450, a little less than 450 respondents, which we found to be a stunning number. And we have some, and a number of you talked about maybe volunteering, and we wanted to welcome you to the opportunity. We have a couple of things that we think we're going to need in the short term and in the long term. We're going to need, you know, like we're writing this climate action plan ourselves as citizens, and we're looking for people who know how to do graphic design and who know how to import pictures legally. We are the city, we need to obey the law, and we want to do all those that sort of thing. We also are planning to have some events where we want to do some community outreach, and we think that's another important place for volunteers. But let's begin by introducing ourselves, and maybe you could introduce yourself and say one place you've been a volunteer in your life. So my name's Sarah Phillips, and I'm the chair of the Climate Action Committee, and I've been a volunteer in an organization called Lower East Side, and we rebuilt housing in the Lower East Side of New York. So, Anne, I'm going to go by my screen. So Anna, you're next.
Sure. I'm Anne Udaloy, vice chair of this committee, and most of my involvement as a volunteer has actually been in neighborhood organizations and clubs around geology. So, for example, Association of Women Geoscientists, I was the treasurer and membership chair for a number of years, and we just enjoy geology and support young women coming into the profession by mentoring and providing scholarships, and have fun field trips.
Terrific. Okay, how about you, Tanya?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So, hello, my name is Tanya Barron. I am a recent, recently moved to Lake Forest Park a year ago from the North Seattle area. I'm super excited to be here. Love this place. So, I worked in the field of sustainability for my entire career for over 20 years. I've worked predominantly in the field of stakeholder engagement, especially with marginalized communities. So that's a big focus of sort of what I do professionally. I would say volunteer-wise, before having kids, I spent some time at the UW just meeting with students and being involved a little bit with the business school on some of their social enterprise competitions. But now as a mom, I spend a lot of time at my son's school. He goes to a cooperative school, so I put in a lot of hours on anything that they need there. So
Of course.
happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Matt?
Sorry, you said me?
I said Matt, but you could go. Matt, sorry.
Hi, my name is Matt Sun. I also recently moved to Lake Forest Park about 2 years ago now, so welcome. Let's see. I apologize, everyone. I was planning to be there in person today, but I got rear-ended this morning on my way to work. And so I was at urgent care getting my neck looked at. So good news, no serious issues, but the volunteering, let's see, recently have, gained, in the last year have gained enough confidence to start volunteering more. After joining the climate committee, I started volunteering with Big Brothers Big Sisters. So I'm mentoring a 13-year-old boy, and that's really cool. And then also was helping out with the whole Washington push for universal healthcare in Washington state, which sadly did not make it to the ballot, but we're still working on it.
And,
I'm Anna Cote. I'm one of the student members on the committee, and I've done a lot of volunteering. Last summer, I spent almost the whole summer volunteering at the Seattle Aquarium, just doing like guest interactive stuff and like interpreting the exhibits for people who came in and working with the kids there. And then I've also done some stuff with this organization called Birthday Dreams, where they like provide birthday parties for foster kids.
okay, Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda Holman, and I've been volunteering in Lake Forest Park for over 30 years. I've lived here for 40 years, and I started out on the original park board and have just kept going with various different configurations of that group. I also volunteer through Lake Forest Park Rotary, and I'm a master gardener, which is a completely volunteer organization from King County. And always been interested and concerned for the environment, so that's how I ended up on this committee.
Okay, thank you. Jessica?
I'm Jessica Cote. So I'm a coastal engineer, and I own a small business which is based in Lake Forest Park because it's out of my home. So I volunteer. I do a lot of salmon recovery work, and so I sit on the Island County Citizen and Technical Advisory Group for salmon recovery as a technical advisor to them. And then I also sit on the Stillaguamish Technical Advisory Group for salmon recovery. And then I've done some other things with the Puget Sound Partnership has various, they call them vital signs that they monitor for the health of Puget Sound. And so I was part of the shoreline armoring reduction committee to look at ways that we could reduce shoreline armoring and basically improve habitat in Puget Sound. So those are my recent activities. And then I used to volunteer at Anna's school as a art docent. And then I also did various guests talking about geology and ocean sciences and things like that in her classroom too. And I guest lecture at UW, which I don't get paid for as well.
Brian, how about you?
Well, hi, I'm Brian Saunders. I'm recently out on parole. No, I'm just kidding. I'm on the Climate Action Committee. I'm also on the Stewardship Foundation. Also on the Water Board Advisory Committee. And I'm a part of the Stream Keepers, where we're monitoring the macular and Lion Creek health. And we've been doing that for quite some time. History goes back pretty far, way farther than I am. And so it's been, that's how I got involved in everything.
Did you get the picture Mark sent of your father?
Yeah. Yeah.
My husband and Brian's father were screaming yesterday. Some of the picture.
Yeah. And I teach at the colleges, so I was going to tell Anna, I didn't know that you were part of the aquarium. I'm a marine biologist by trade, so let me know if you're interested in doing some cool research on marine biology. If that's your interest.
I will, thanks.
Hey, Angela.
Hello, I'm Angela Shepard, and just recently connected with this group, but my most recent volunteering experience has been with Whale Scout, and I've been working on helping out with their pod match program. So, and I thought that was a very cool experience, and I wanted to find other ways to get involved with things related to the environment. And
well, her most recent one was sorting names for us with the survey, which we'll talk about. In a minute. Have a Tracy?
Hi, my name is Tracy Furutani. I'm on city council and I'm the liaison to this committee. And, you know, some of you know from my day job, what a, incredible artsy geek I am. So basically, my volunteer is I'm on the board of Shoreline Arts. And, we're gearing up for a full slate of like great events. So please come.
Is there a dinner?
Yeah, the gala is March 25th.
And you're next.
I'm next. So like a lot of you, I went through 20 years of volunteering in kids' schools. So I was an artist and then a math coach, math Olympiad coach here, and a secretary and multiple roles on the PTA. And I'm doing Stream Keepers, which I really love, with Brian and Tracy and others.
By the way, you never said your name. by the way.
Oh, sorry. That's not right. I'm known as Cleo's mom. My name is Dana Campbell. I've been in Lake Forest Park for about 10 years.
Well, I just, Corey.
Corey Roach, I work at the City of Lake Forest Park. I coordinate a lot of the volunteer work in the city, and then I also we'll do park cleanups, and then I played softball my entire life, so I'll volunteer with teams here and there.
No wonder you all showed up here at this meeting, right? It's sort of a rich history of volunteering. So what the notes that I have from Tamara, who's working on this, wanted to talk about, first of all, thank you for volunteering. And it just is an extraordinary thing to have some more people beginning to work on this project. We think that, well, I wanted to ask those of you who aren't on the committee, to put you on the spot, of course, if there's some specific thing that you were thinking about volunteering, or did you just want to hear what we were up to and make some decisions? Okay, well, let me, time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in hearing more to sort of really understand what the committee's doing and then how to, potentially be involved. I've spent a lot of time thinking about community engagement, so I'm always really interested in the human elements of this. How do we engage people, all sorts of people, right, at different levels, and equity issues around engagement. So I'm interested in all of it, but that's sort of like an area of expertise that I feel like I can, support with, if that is necessary.
That's really excellent, Jill. We've done a lot of talking about how we need to make sure this equity is woven into this plan, and how we do that is still being revealed to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So what we're thinking is that in terms of outreach, we've got a couple of things that are sort of in the sort of immediate horizon, and those are things like where we have outreach where we're meeting people who we might not ordinarily see. The garden tour has I don't know if any of you have seen the garden tour or been on it, but there is a place inside where they sell plants, and not-for-profit organizations can set up a table and tell their story. And we were thinking that would be a good place. We've reserved a place at the farmers market in, we're sorting out the date, but we're hoping for July when the strawberries are in and everybody comes to the market. And we think that is a two-pronged place there where we'll go do outreach to folks and also report on some of the things that we've done. And there's a green fair coming up sometime soon where we would probably staff a table as well and maybe assist in other ways. So those are the kinds of things that we see coming up right up. But one of the things we're really interested in is youth outreach to how we make sure we continue to get youth outreach. We did some demographics on our survey and we found those were the people who were not responding. It was either you or Bella who submitted it and told us how old you were, because there was only one person under 17 or under. So that is the under 17. She might be. She might be 18. Yeah.
And also, and Tanya may be able to speak to this, but you know, one of the things that we don't even know is what other languages should we be reaching out in? Right, we don't necessarily even, you know, of course, the survey that we put out was in English, but that meant that basically if you're speaking some other language, it automatically cuts you out. So we don't even know enough to know what we need to know.
Yeah. Yes, and well, I think maybe what would be helpful at this point is to see if we could have coffee with you sometime, or pick your brain out, see what do that, and maybe a subcommittee of us. Do you work in town or?
Yeah, I run my own business at my house. So my home office here in Lake Forest Park, close to the town center. So very easy
Okay.
to do that. Yeah.
Terrific. So I will give you a call and we'll set up a time and invite some other folks in. Fewer than 5. The magic number is. So what I wanted to do now, and I invite the volunteers to stay with us if they'd like to, but I wanted to show you what we found from the survey and our findings. And I'm gonna stumble through it. I just want you to know that. Mimi did this for us. She took our data, and what we did for the context is what we did was we took the all of the answers and we counted that it was a survey monkey, so it allowed you to count the number of things, and we put those in a chart. And then there was an extraordinary richness of responses to open-ended questions. So sometimes we had 300 responses. So we had to sort through those, and what we did was we collected those comments, we sorted them, we counted them, we named them, and then we wrote a descriptive sentence about them. So we have some sense about what that is, and we could go back and look at the data again, specific kind of data. So let me show you where we are on this, and this is the Climate Action Committee. There's our logo. And let me just say, I won't be able to see you all. I don't have that view on, but if you have any questions, just jump in and we'll try and figure them out. And it may be that I don't know the answer, but it's good to have that question because then we can find out the answer. So this is what the survey was. We said that there were 40 questions. And what we wanted to do was get some input from Lake Forest Park citizens to sort of what they were thinking about this process. And it was just the first step in giving the residents a voice in this climate action process. So we designed the survey internally and distributed it through as many places as we possibly could. We sent it to, we did it through the city's newsletter distribution. We went to apartment buildings, and if they had distribution lists, we sent it through them. We sent it through utility groups, community groups, lists that people had access to that were public lists. We sent it to every sewer and water district member who was online. So we did as much outreach as we could, but it was still a survey of the people who answered. We think it was 3% of the population answered, and we don't know if that's a good number or not. I just have no idea. 85% own a home in Lake Forest Park, 7% rent, 6% are others, so they live in apartments or they condos or something. And most of the people who answered the survey lived in Lake Forest Park, although as you can see, the other people lived in Shoreline. It's good to know what our neighbors are thinking too, I think. So this is sort of who did the survey and how it compares with the census data in Lake Forest Park. So more women than men answered, and this is both in Lake Forest Park. and is national, and that the household size is probably typical for Lake Forest Park is 2 people. That's probably a typical, but maybe average of the most, yeah. There's a new slide for me. So that the age range of the respondents compared to the census. So we took the census for Lake Forest Park. So we had, which, as you can see, we were pretty close, but we had more people responding in the 18 to 64 than there is in the population. The ages of people less than 5%. The ages of people in respondent households versus the age range. I don't know what that means.
In other words, we asked a question that said, if you're in a household, what are the ages of the other people in your household? And so that's why we have those age ranges in the single digits and double digits, low double digits, because there were a lot of kids represented by the people who were answering the survey.
Okay. And this was what we thought was a really, I mean, a sentinel piece of what we got out of this survey, and that was that almost everybody who answered this, 88% of Lake Forest Park survey respondents were either very concerned or somewhat concerned about climate. So we have some people who aren't concerned, but not very many, and given the whole picture of who's in Lake Forest Park and what they're responding to. This is also an interesting statistic that very concerned in Lake Forest Park is much more than the nation as a whole who are very concerned about it. And so they switch. Lake Forest Park people are more concerned. The Lake Forest Park people who answered the survey are more concerned about climate change than the population in general. Interesting. We also there is a caveat. We did put this survey out during smoke alert. But in what way? So, in what ways have you been affected by climate change? So they've experienced a huge number, 79% experienced the negative effects of smoke from forest fires. 51 noted that changes in the water levels in lakes and streams. Are you surprised by that, Jessica? The 51 noted changes in water and levels?
I am not, no, I am not surprised by that. Not in the slightest bit. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned at the last meeting briefly that I was dealing with a lot of flood response from the December 27th events where we had king tides, but the thing that was coupled with those king tides was we had 4 inches of rain over 4 days. And so the places that were the most affected were at the downstream end of a stream as it enters Puget Sound. So where you have the coupling of both the elevated king tides, but you also have these really high stream flows and then just water falling on the plains kind of thing. So no, that doesn't, and it's so some people get the perception we're getting more frequent flooding. It's more that it's just a higher level of flooding. So we get this once a year, and it is more frequent too, but it's also just overall higher level. So yeah.
Jessica, I'm really curious because one of the things that I hear comments a lot, because I spend a lot of time down by the lake, is how low the level of the lake is. Have you ever heard that opposite, like during the summer months, that we're actually, seems like we're having less water?
Yeah, that is also true. The lake is a funny place because it's a managed water level, right? And it's managed in not, it's managed in a way that it's meeting several different needs. So the water levels are tied to things sort of that outside of maybe not exactly how we think that it might be managed, I guess, just to sort of say. And I had researched a bunch of the particulars about it a while ago. I've kind of forgotten right now, but yes, I have noticed that the lake levels in the summertime are lower than usual. And part of that is because we're having these longer periods of dry, right? So we get these really intense periods of wet, but then we have longer periods of dry, particularly at the end of the summer, right? It's been taking a long time, and Anne may have more to say about this as a hydrogeologist, but it's taking longer for the rains to come back at the end of the summer. Or we've had these unusual dry periods in the spring too. So it's, our weather patterns have just become more erratic. So yeah, we get these higher water levels than we would like in the winter time with really intense rain that our landscapes can't absorb it. There's too much runoff. We don't have enough capacity to handle those flows in our natural systems anymore. And then conversely, we have really low water in the summertime too. So
Well, that's going to be really interesting because the stream keepers just recently started to measure stream flow, like volume of stream flow for both Mackler and Lion. It'd be interesting to see if we start seeing trends of higher amounts in the rainy seasons and lower amounts in the summer, especially the end of the summer.
Yeah, cool. And I own some instrumentation that does things like stream flow and stuff like that. So if you guys are ever like missing stuff and you need something or whatever, feel free to give me a
We
call.
use the sophisticated model of the lemon that floats in the water.
Oh, I have an actual stream. Tell me next time you're going out, and I'll bring some toys.
Well, we have too much fun though. Dana even said it's her favorite part.
All right. Well, in addition to water, apparently, almost half of the residents felt uncomfortable in their homes with heat or cold. But not so many people had the friends or family who had catastrophic events. And these were some of the responses for other reasons about how they were affected. That they said 28% respondents said changes in the weather patterns, fire, snowpack, or atmospheric events. 22 said they had not noticed, they weren't concerned or in denial about climate change. They said there was no impact. Personal feelings of anxiety and emotions for themselves and their future generations was sort of an issue that people were raising in terms of other responses. Observable impacts to the surroundings, plants, animals, and other ecology. And the other thing that people were seeing were not responsive. We had some people who made up stuff. What are you doing as a result of climate change? And the respondents are reacting to the impacts by doing things that provide immediate respite. So they're limiting their activities. And we know that, right? People didn't go outside, they didn't do in their gardens. 40 to 45% of the respondents are adding air conditioning or air filters, which is sort of new in Lake Forest Park. I turned my air conditioner on for the first time in 35 years. So they're changing their landscape patterns, planting trees that have longer term investment. So changing landscaping and planting trees which have longer term return on investment were the least common activities that people were taking. Although I know some people were changing. So, and these were again, what are the short answers that people were talking about? They're driving less, they're making personal choices, they're gardening differently, they're doing home improvement projects like heat pumps and solar. They're volunteering for things like park restoration, venting. We have to maybe better names for them. They're trying to get smarter, they're making donations. So there's a lot of stuff that people are doing. What strategies or actions should the city prioritize? And they said these were high, medium, or low. And what we asked was a series of 7 questions. But most of the suggestions were rated either high or medium priority by over 75% of the respondents, which is a big number. So we have a big cluster of what people are thinking we should do. And then the one that they thought was the most important was that we partner with other, not most important, the one that they felt that the most people thought we should do was partnering with other cities to influence climate change. And the least popular option was requiring the homeowner to before they sell their home, to provide for potential buyers with an energy audit. People didn't want to spend any more money on that. That's something they do in Portland. And these were the questions that we asked, and they were partnered with other cities. These are in order: transition to non-fossil fuel, are you biking or walking? Informing residents about existing incentives, subsidies for people. So these were the questions we were asking. Let me just, transition to non-fossil fuels, significantly reducing landfill, provide incentives for people and businesses to transition, change the city's purchasing policy, build bike lanes and sidewalks, installing charging stations for electric vehicles, require new construction, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. I'm saying that because here they are again. And these are the same questions again listed, ordered by what was the highest one. So this one that says partner with other cities. This is the orange is high, the red is medium, and the blue is low. So you can see that in these questions about what we should do, there was a consensus. I would say that the consensus is we ought to do some things. And then they were kind of trying to describe specifically what they were. And so this partnering with other cities was important. And then the transition to non-fossil fuels. And it's really, people in the city sort of knew what the answers were to the questions of what are the emissions areas that we need to work on. So we know from our study on the emissions that the areas we need to work on are transportation and buildings are the big ones, but also solid waste and refrigerants. And people were sort of at a consensus that those were the kinds of things that we should be doing. So does that make sense? Does that tell a story? Okay. And then there were some other responses to the strategies that they should we should do. They thought we should provide more transportation. There is a consistent group within this our survey who felt the government was intruding into their lives and that they should back off, and that this wasn't a problem. And they were articulate about that particular place. We should install protections in green spaces, encourage solar and hydropower. Oops, sorry. Support zoning that would make denser housing is a smaller one, and have emergency funds for emergency benefits. And that's a piece of what we were thinking too, is that we want to build resiliency as well as responsiveness. So questions 24 to 30 asked ways that the respondent is minimizing their own contribution. Half of the people in Lake Forest Park are walking rather than driving, making some choices to walk instead of drive. That's certainly noticeable in our neighborhood. Lots of people on the street. From most popular was walk instead of drive, and the least popular was drive an electric vehicle, in part because of financing. But the other alternatives were battery powered equipment for landscaping, public transportation, electric appliances, heat pumps, bikes, and then driving an electric car. So these were do you walk instead of drive? There's yes and no. Have you taken public transportation instead of drive? Do you have an electric appliances in your home? Do you have a heat pump, you bike, you drive? And these were ways people were talking about minimizing their contributions. Then when you ask the question, why don't, the responses were, why don't?
Can I make one point about that last slide?
Yeah.
It's interesting that basically even more yeses for having the electric powered, battery powered landscaping equipment.
Yeah, it's cheap and easy.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, I think, yes, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I remember working on that a little bit, and they don't like the smell. They like the smell and noise too, because the alternative is gas.
Right.
They don't like the smell of the gas.
Right.
Yeah, they don't like the smell of the gas. Not fresh.
I'm wondering if
Yeah.
electricity smells.
Well, electrons are stinky.
Stinky, yeah. So why don't you bike? Because we live in a hilly place.
Yeah.
So a number of people said that. They're concerned about safety and infrastructure. That Chicago would be. Some people, it's just not feasible to get in their car and go to they need to get in their car and go to the bike doesn't work. Some people just don't like bikes. It's hard to move your kids and cargo some people are shut-ins from home. Some ride an e-bike and they're concerned about expense and affordability, not very many. I mean, bicycle cheap. Why don't you drive an EV? And this was, the reason they don't drive an EV is because of cost. So this is an aside. So that's, you know, part of what we want to do in our public education program is talk about the incentives programs that are already out there. So look, there, I think it's $7,000. I sent you all something this morning.
Yeah.
It's a significant impact on cost. So we could do some work on that. But also, you know, their car's working now, they don't want to go ahead and buy one. They're concerned about the infrastructure of EVs, when there are enough charging station. And there's the cost and energy to build and operate an EV are not climate friendly. I'm not sure that's accurate. So, I mean, some of the research that we're seeing, it comes on both sides of that issue. And then some people were planning their next vehicle to be an EV. The final set of questions asked respondents what they wanted to learn more about. The most popular was learning about minimizing their contribution to climate change. And the most popular was learning about advocating for climate-friendly policy change. Those are stunning numbers, it seems to me, that 60% of the people who responded are, you know, want to make changes in their lives. Of the 5 options listed, and we'll show you those on the next slide, the least popular was getting information on the least popular is getting more information on climate change and volunteering with us. How could that be? How could that possibly be? So again, these are, I think, pretty amazing numbers. Over 50% of the people wanted to minimize their contribution, their personal contribution, and advocate for climate-friendly policies.
Do you think they already know enough information about climate change, and that's why they don't want it?
No, that's a good question.
I think that very well may be, because
They think that. they
yeah,
do.
if you saw some of the free response answers, they're very articulate. Even the climate deniers know what the arguments are. So it's interesting. I found that to be very interesting.
Yeah. Is there anything else you do to minimize your individual contribution? So they talk about recycling, conservation of people, water resources, they're traveling less, they're shopping locally, more composting. Voting. So for us, it's the recommendations, the highest recommendations for the city would be to partner with neighboring cities and you know, they're doing that on the east side. The east side have 5 cities who are working on heat pumps and public education and rebates, and we're hoping to steal that model. Partner with other cities on mitigation strategies and adaptation and resilience building, and provide citizens an avenue to advocate for climate-friendly policies. What the Women Voters Information is, but they're good organizations. So check that. What do people need to know more about in order to make informed decisions and take action? That's sort of that's the question we're asking. What do we need to tell people about? What are the kinds of things that we need to do? And how do we, there is embedded within some of these answers, some misconceptions, and how do we address those? I think those are important things that we want to talk about. So I'm stopping sharing. So that's our response, our survey. Any sort of top line responses to our responses? Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually really shocked at more than 25% of the respondents having already installed heat pumps.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because that actually is a relatively high cost activity that has to be undertaken by somebody who decides that they're just going to go that way.
And do you know in the city how many heat pumps have been installed? Is there a way to know that?
I don't have a firm fix on that right now, but it's not 25% of our housing stock. So
this is a select group then that are doing more
that's,
heat pumps.
I'm just saying, using that as kind of a gauge to who's connecting with the survey, that's a highly motivated group. Now, we are working to get a better fix on how many homes have heat pumps. It can be a little challenging to get that information, but we'll get there. But yeah, that people embracing that as a direction to go and looking for information and support to do that. We may be able to help people connect in this next couple of years, that window of time when there will be federal support as well as state, likely state programs also. Connect people and get them going on that.
Tanya, did you hear something?
Yeah, I have a question. Were you guys able to collect any more information just about the population that filled out the survey, like either socioeconomic, or income or anything like that? I'm trying to paint a picture, understand who responded to the survey. And I believe there was age, right? Age range.
Yes.
And household size. So I was just curious about that.
That's all.
Because
we
I
asked.
think would start painting a really interesting picture.
Yeah, we asked age, sex, household, number of people in household, and whether they rented or owned.
Okay.
We didn't ask ethnic, they're asking ethnicity.
Right.
Did we?
We also didn't ask any socioeconomic stuff either yet. The survey was so long already, so, yeah.
Did you think that's gonna change budget? Did you see that as a liability?
It's just, it's just sort of in trying to understand who is responding, right? And it's likely that we're getting really, I'm assuming it's folks that probably maybe higher socioeconomic status potentially, or middle high and a certain age range. And so it's just sort of interesting in thinking about that, and then eventually thinking about a plan, making sure that we're getting sort of, different types of voices. There may have to be different engagements to be able to try to get different voices, but that's something that obviously can be looked at in future work.
I'm planning in 2 weeks to present this information to the city council, because we've made it at this meeting, it's public information. We ought to be the people who are telling them as opposed to other people. Are there suggestions that you have in terms of making this presentation to the, Mimi will come with me, so she did a lot of the work on this, so she'll be able to answer any technical questions. Any suggestions there?
So perhaps frame it in the context of the census, because we do have our most recent census from 2020, and that does give us a snapshot of the community in Lake Forest Park, which is, all our children are above average, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it is helpful to have that snapshot so that we understand our starting community, if you will.
I mean, so you think we ought to add to this? This is what the census, current census looks like, and these are the
Yeah,
people.
and we can also show some of the trends from the last 20 years. For instance, the reduction in homes that are heated with wood. There's a number of changes that we can see in the census that are probably worth bringing forward as the changing face of our community. Our community does change over time.
Well, and Sarah, are they going to ask you, so what are you guys going to do with this information?
Yes. I'm going to say, well, put it up in the Climate Action Committee report. And I think we were thinking we'd probably make some posters that we could do out at public events, the garden, the Green Fair and the garden, just to begin to tell the story. But if you have suggestions besides that.
Well, I think one thing when you present it, so I'm organizing to teach a bunch of classes. And so we have this woman, Kathy Angel, who's pretty amazing. And she works with people who do adult presentations to adults and adult learning topics, and so she's constantly getting me to simplify my slides, add less information, circle things, use arrows to point to things. So if you're presenting this to them, like you were talking about some stuff, but I had to like scan and search the page and be like, what was she talking about? Which bar was that? So just some, you know, ways to clarify it, grab their attention so that they, because you got to remember that you've looked at this a whole bunch, right? And I mean, even Tamara looked at it, you know, even more. So it might be obvious to you and jump out, right? But for them who's just seeing it for the first time and you've got like 10 bar graphs, it just might not jump out. The things that you're trying to point out to them might not jump out at them. So that would be just one thing. And I would say, you know, like summarizing with like, what are the 3 big takeaways, you know, like trying to come up with a couple of like high level, you know, fundamentals that stood out at us, and also maybe, yeah, like things like heat pumps, like maybe it's not as big of a deal to, I mean, we still want to incentivize heat pumps, but you know, maybe there are things that we rethink that, you know, we were talking about before, and I haven't thought about it in enough detail to know what those are, but if anyone else has ideas.
I think there were a few duplicated, like the info was in different presentations, but on different slides. So I think you cut it down to like you would have a bar graph and then the question at the same time.
And I'm not sure, do you think there's any narrative or helpful pieces discussing what people were talking about in the narrative part where they were writing their own answers? Is that helpful? Tracy's saying yes. Okay. All right. Well, to simplify it. Yeah.
So, Sarah, in terms of one of the things that we could do with this knowledge, we talked in the past about whether or not we could, you know, very much as we have the Lake Forest Park garden tour, the Lake Forest Park heat pump and solar panel tour. Yeah, or the Lake Forest pump, why I think I need sidewalks in my neighborhood tour. the death trap for walking children tour.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is the more we know our own community, the more we share our own reality with each other, then I think it will help. When we're showing improvements like the heat pumps, I think it demystifies and removes some of the fear of installing a heat pump. When you can meet a human being who says, I've had this in my house for X number of years, it's really comfortable. I'm not having problems. And on the other side, it brings us together as a community to say, here are some infrastructure issues that, you know, you may not experience in your life because you don't live in my neighborhood, but I experience every day.
All right.
I'm wondering if I have a question just around, I think something that was just mentioned around how to use this information. I guess I'm curious. It seems like this such, I think maybe somebody mentioned, oh, we might create some posters with, you know, this initial survey. It seems like such a great way to engage people in a conversation. And I'm wondering if there's a way to, and maybe you guys have thought about this already, but see it sort of as a baseline, and then every time there's an event, there's an opportunity to kind of gather feedback and kind of build that picture, right? We have somewhat of a picture, but there might be different ways of engaging people that in these future events that you're mentioning. And it would be great if there's a way to kind of build on that, to continue adding, right, to this knowledge base that you've developed.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we tell them what we found and sort of and ask another set of questions. That's helpful. I'm going to pull the curtain on this because we've got a couple of other things that we wanted to do today. And I wanted to show you, and our guests are welcome to stay at this meeting. We love having you here. What I'm gonna do now is look at something. Why is it?
Shall we do the agenda or the minutes?
Oh, yeah, let's do the minutes while I find out. Is there a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting?
I moved to the minutes of the last.
Any objections to the minutes of the last meeting? Okay. And do we adopt the agenda too? Maybe we should adopt the agenda.
That would be a good thing.
Anybody opposed to the agenda that we're halfway through? Okay. What I wanted to do was to find something I can't find any. Okay,
Vision and goals.
yes, but that's what I'm trying to find. I haven't. So I'm gonna move around. Matt, are you comfortable? Well, to let Matt go ahead and talk about the county. I look at you and it looks like you bumped into something, Matt. We're very worried about you. You
What?
okay? Are you okay from being rear-ended?
Yeah, I'm okay. They said no imaging was required, so it's good.
Yeah. Okay, well, Matt, are you ready to show us how
Yeah.
this tool?
So I can talk a little bit here. Let me share my screen.
Let me just set the context for just a minute. I asked Matt to look at the King County toolkit where they've, and it's a very complex tool, and he's going to show us how to use it, which would allow us to look at the impact of taking specific actions. So as we're working on what we're doing, this tool may be helpful. But he's going to show us how to use it.
Yeah, so I mean, there's the toolkit, which is this document, which is kind of like a guideline that you can kind of walk through to create a climate action plan. It's got some examples, some ideas, and so I think that it's really good reading. I haven't really gone through the whole thing, but what I have read is really seems like it would be really useful. You know, a primer to all the kind of stuff that we're going to be looking at. One of the important parts of the toolkit is this return on climate tool. Yes. And the idea is that so it'll give you what are the best buys in terms of the actions that you can take for your community. So it comes pre-filled in with what it thinks are the best for you for King County, if you're the average for King County. And then so these are the overall best buys, and then you've got in terms of if you really care about reducing emissions versus ease of implementation, climate. Ooh. Oh, there's my scroll bar. That's a tiny scroll bar. Okay. Climate justice and equity, cost savings, and economic recovery and resiliency. So you can kind of break down within each of those what are the top 10 best buys. Oh yeah, and mobility, public health. And then here's the tricky part is that you can weight each of these, you can score each action that it recommends. So it's got this long list of different potential ideas that you can do. And then they're grouped by topic. And then you can answer all these questions. And the thing is that you just score them 1 to 5. And so the real trick here is that how good of an output you're going to get depends highly on how well versed the person who fills this out is on like what is feasible within your city. So one person might say, oh yeah, this is very easy to implement, or it's actually maybe that's not a 4, maybe that's a 3. So this is the tricky part, is that I think it could be really a useful tool if we have the right people on hand to fill it out, to figure out which what scores are really appropriate. But yeah, so there's these basic scores, and then there are some binary things like, does this improve citizens' mobility? Does it improve public health? Does it improve the natural environment? And so if you were to change a bunch of these, okay, you're not supposed to make it 23, but then you can refresh the scores and it will change what your top 10 best buys are in terms of policy. And, so it does that for both the community, in terms of reducing community emissions. How do I make my screen sharing? Oh, there it is. Okay. And then it's also got government, in terms of things that are going to impact your government's emission, business travel policy, cities telecommuting policy. So yeah, I think again, it's the devil is in the details, that you could get some good data out of these about like, okay, these are the things we should really be focusing on, but you're probably going to have people who might disagree about what's a 1 and what's a 2, or what's a 3 or what's a 4. So I think that one way we could approach it is, kind of split up into teams, maybe have like 2 or 3 people take each one of these categories and just kind of like talk it out. Or, have some people who feel like, I don't know who would be the most qualified person to fill out some of these. Like I said, that you might want someone with an intimate knowledge of how things work in City Hall. So yeah, I'm open to everyone else's thoughts on that.
Is there like a certain amount of like 5s and 4s you're allowed to give out, or?
No, you could just put 5s for everything, I think, but then you would get not very good data, right? I think that's actually a really good point that you bring up, because it's kind of that question in the survey that was talking about, should this be a low, medium, or high priority? It's like a little bit of like, yes, if people can say everything is a high priority, like you said, yeah, maybe it would make sense to kind of limit how many, but 5s are not always like good, right? I guess 5s are always good, because it kind of flips, from high potential to easy to implement. But yeah, that's a good question. So I think that this, combined with, all these examples and stuff, it's definitely helpful. I think, again, my personal take is that we know a lot of the things that we need to do. I think there are some great ideas in here that warrant further looking into, like, oh, I wouldn't have even thought of that. Like, let's, but some of this stuff like electric car chargers, these things are things that like we already kind of were on our radar, and it's really going to end up being about how many people, like what can we afford to do, what's feasible, what's the easiest to implement.
So would you take, like, would you say, could you walk us through an example of one of, could you just take that, update the city's telecommunity policy to increase?
Oh wait, so let's look at some of the community. So say we were to look at like use incentives to encourage purchase of electric vehicles with stronger incentives for low income residents.
Okay.
For in terms of emissions reduction potential, it defaults to a 3. So that's right in the middle. I don't like, what are you comparing it to? So, getting more electric cars on the road would take gas cars off, which would reduce emissions, but also, based on the survey, how many people are going to buy electric cars if the incentives are either not enough, or it's not going to change their minds.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I find it difficult to make an argument for moving this one way or another, just because a 1 to 5 scale doesn't, there's a lot that you need to know to distill down to 1 to 5.
But if you go to the next column.
Yeah, so ease of implementation,
Okay.
I would rate this like very difficult, because again, we've talked about creating incentives, giving any sort of like subsidies for purchase of electric vehicles is like really expensive and not something that, city. So I would change that from, like a 3 to a 1. Why is that tooltip not going away? Tooltip, go away. Climate justice and equity, it rates pretty low, which I think makes sense because, you know, again, even with subsidies, only a select number of people are going to be able to purchase electric vehicles, and only those people are going to benefit from those subsidies. It's,
If there's a stronger incentive for low income, would that bump that up?
I think that's why it's a 2.
Oh, okay.
But like, honestly, you know, I think that something that would, you know, some of these other policies look at like, you know, increasing network of safe bike lanes, boulevards, wider sidewalks. I'm surprised that this is only a 2. Maybe I accidentally changed that, but that would be more, you know, like a 4 or 5, but something that, you know, impacts like public transportation or something would have a higher equity impact than something that's like encouraging people to buy electric cars.
So then once we've done that for Lake Forest Park, or what the committee had done it, then we would, those, which one was the highest might change around.
Yeah, exactly. So you would go back to this, you would refresh the scores, and these might be radically different, you know.
Mhm.
Like I said, right now, the top 10 are kind of just determined by what King County thinks is going to be the average for all of King County.
Okay.
But ours might be different. And, you know, if we fill them out right, then we might get a really good idea of what we should focus our energy on. And then, you know, at least we get some ideas along the way, and filling it out might be a good thought experiment about, you know, okay, what are we making sure that we're considering all of these things in terms of, you know, not just what's easy to implement, but also like what's gonna have a good impact for people and the environment and mobility.
So do you think it's a useful, even if we didn't do the ranking, the brains, they have sort of a predetermined brainstorm of kinds of things we could do, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good brainstorming tool. Like I said, I don't think that you're gonna get like a perfect consensus of like, yes, these are the top 10 things. We can all agree that these scores are perfect. And but I think that you're gonna get a lot of good ideas going through these, and a lot of good discussions generated around like, oh, do we think that this should be weighted in a certain way, or like, oh, I didn't think about how this would impact this. So yeah, it'll generate a lot of ideas and a lot of discussion, if nothing else. But yeah, I think the scoring system leaves a little bit to be desired.
Okay. Any questions about this tool? And it's on the King County website.
Yeah, I just went to King County Climate Action Toolkit, and then you can download the PDF, and then you can download the Return on Climate tool here. And yeah, it's got, you know, it's got whole guides on how to do the scoring, because the scoring is just so open to interpretation.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions?
I wonder if there are examples out there. How new is that tool?
It's been around. I think they published this in like 2020. Yeah.
Maybe 2 years?
So is there a way to find out whether others have used it, other cities, or?
Yeah, so they've got you know, a demonstration for Issaquah and Renton on the website. You can kind of watch somebody go through it with you know, like the city manager of those cities. Like I said, I think that's the kind of question, is like, you know, if you had a city manager, someone who was like, you know, really able to give you good scores, you might get something really useful. And yeah, I think that like I said, watching those videos would be helpful to get an idea of how other people are using it. But yeah, it might be valuable to like ask, you know, I can reach out to like Shoreline and Kenmore and see if they have used this tool and where they came down on it.
That fits the mission of partnering with others.
Stealing from other companies.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful. All right, I'm now going to share my screen. Okay. We have sort of Dana and Mimi and I had done this draft outline, which we put on a shared drive. And one of the things that we put on here is this. Oh, and I noticed you've all populated it with all the work you've done. That was a joke. We have very little one. But one of the things I thought was critical to moving forward was making sure that we had a consensus on this first three parts, the vision and our goals. And the reason I thought that was important was that it was the issue that Matt raised, sort of, if we get into a discussion and we say, no, it's a 1, or no, it's a 7, or whatever those choices are. If we could go back to the goals and the vision, and those were our touchstones about how we were proceeding, I think it would help us streamline sort of the issues that we were looking at. And what we had said on our vision was that Lake Forest Park will be a net zero community among net zero communities in the county, state, nation, and the world. That was our vision for this, that we would be, because that was our vision. And then we picked, remind me where these were shoreline goals. We picked these partly out of shoreline work.
Yeah, we followed through, yeah.
And they said that in order to move towards they didn't have a vision, but they had these 3 goals: reduce and/or limit the greenhouse gas emissions to reach the K4C emissions target of 50% emissions reduction by 2030 compared to the and most local emissions are from fuel use and transportation and natural gas in buildings. So that our first goal was to reach align ourselves with the K4C goals of emission reductions. So those are 50% in 2030, 75% in 3040, and 95% in 2050.
Yes.
So that I think that sort of mushed around there. And the second one is build resiliency and adaptive strategies for our community through restorations of our local ecosystems and enhanced sequestration. And then I don't think that's a real sentence. Use the forest coverage to remove carbon and assist in the absorption of water. Such as for sure. We were thinking that we would be able to build on our asset, which is our forest, and our canopy cover to meet these goals. And the third was develop environmental protection that supports and promotes healthy ecosystems, prepare residents, especially the most vulnerable, for changes in weather patterns, hotter summers and colder, wetter winters. The additional benefits of doing that is clean air, water, greater ecosystem health, and cost savings. So my question has to do with these goals. Are they? They're a little messy, as I see as I'm reading them out loud. But are they where we want to go with our goals in our writing project? Making bigger. Maybe we take out. What if we take out this sentence? Or just that isn't a goal, is it? It's just data.
Agree.
And it would read reduce and/or limit greenhouse gas emissions to reach the K4C emission targets.
Or
I agree. That's not really that last sentence isn't part of a goal.
or you can incorporate it,
Yeah, it says that's sort of the priority.
right, by, cutting fuel use, transportation, natural gas in buildings or something like that.
You'd have to word it as something like recognizing that fuel use and transportation and natural gas, the use of natural gas in homes are the primary sources of or make major contributions to the carbon footprint of our community. And that would be the first clause in, that would actually go before reduce and or limit.
I'm sorry, recognizing.
To GHG emissions.
And you think that goes,
I think that's the first clause in that sentence. That's how you start the sentence.
you take this and put it up here?
Yep. And then,
I-
yep,
That's true, but it's not really a part of the goal. Like the goal is to reduce emissions wherever we find them.
Good point.
yeah, and I'm actually happy with just leaving that. I think that information is going to come up separately at some other point, so it doesn't need to be in this section.
So we just,
Yes,
so we take that out and say that our first goal is to reduce or
Yep.
limit greenhouse gases to reach the K4C targets.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with taking that out entirely as well.
Okay, yeah, easy. Okay, the second one we talked about was build resilience and adaptive strategies for our communities through the restoration of local ecosystems and enhanced sequestration.
Is that what we really said?
Well, I know, yeah, I think it was. It doesn't mean it's the right answer. I mean, maybe that's not our goal.
I mean, I think it's good to bolster our ecosystems. And that can help build resistance. But it seems like it's not the only way to build resilience.
Okay,
Was that coming from shorelines? This
I
one?
can't
We can't
remember, this was
remember.
a long time ago.
Okay, is this, do we want to fool around with this? Is this something, I think we actually made this up because people had talked about, and particularly Brian, this is you, talking about wanting to use the canopy and the tree coverage as a piece of what makes our plan unique.
Actually, that's why I kind of like it. I'm kind of biased in that, but I guess maybe maybe the trouble that Dana might be having with it is the building resilience as maybe.
I think this question was maybe meant to like focus on how we're going to work on keeping the health of our ecosystem as high as we can. And one of the motivations for doing that is that it will build resistance.
But I guess that's why.
resilience, and adapt.
Right, that's why, but I kind of like the adaptive strategy kind of opens it for all,
Yeah.
kind of covers all that.
What if we just did build adaptive strategies? Is resilience important in there?
I think so.
Okay.
Why don't we
Yes,
leave
it
it for right now and let me mull it over.
Resilient, is it resilient strategies or resilience?
It's either, depends what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think we need to figure out.
I do kind of like it because I feel like acknowledging that like that's not really a given that we're gonna be like that most people are like developing these strategies for like their climate plans. And I think that it's good to like state it so that people can see like, oh, they're like keeping us in mind and like our, you know, climate anxiety and stuff and like things that that people can, I don't know, just like use to kind of like deal with it as well. Does that make sense?
It seems fairly similar, the 2 and the 3, they're both talking about I don't know, it seems like we might have some other goals besides this condition. I think we're talking about goals being reducing our carbon footprint and increasing, so like mitigating effect, and then adapting to what issues would come up with climate change. And then our third one, I think, was to include protection for the environment that we have here. Special part of
Yeah.
this.
The first sentence in the third actually goes in the second, and it's redundant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second clause in the second is a sentence fragment that is not really necessary. I mean, it's
Yeah, I like what Dana said, that I'm a big believer that there's that quote that if you can't explain something simply, it means you don't understand it well enough.
Okay.
And I would like 2 and 3 to somebody to like sum up the core of the statement, because I feel like they're like multi-topic sentences with a lot going on. And like the way Dana summed it up was like, 1 is about reducing emissions, 2 is about helping people, like want to say helping people avoid the effects of climate change, and 3 can be about like helping preserve the ecosystems in the face of
And
climate change.
that I totally agree with you. In fact, the equity piece should probably go into 2, because that's more about the helping people, especially basically in very vulnerable situations, right? And so that's a very people-based clause. 3 is much more of a environment ecosystem-based clause. So I think that makes sense.
So helping people deal with the impacts of climate change, or
Helping people, maybe especially vulnerable.
Populations.
really. And we get rid of this stuff.
well, that can go to section 3 or something, but just drag it all down to section 3 for now, and we'll deal with section 3 as a group.
Okay. So, so Dana, what was your insight here? Your profound insight here?
Well,
Yep.
I think often these plans kind of have these ideas that you're going to reduce carbon, you're going to adapt to the impacts that are coming. And then this piece about making sure we include not just humans in what we're working to
Yes.
preserve.
I mean, the sentence as such isn't bad there.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, you want,
Yeah.
okay, good.
Yeah.
Build resilient and adaptive strategies for our communities through restoration of our ecosystems.
Yeah.
But then,
Yeah, so
Take that out.
yeah,
There you go.
Okay, easier, right?
unless
Yeah.
anyone has other goals that they think that our plan should have.
I mean, yes, absolutely. We should, and you don't have to, it doesn't have to be tonight, you have to come up with it, but if you have them on the top of your head that we should add to this, we can. And I think we'll come back next time and just say, after you sat with these, are these right? But I really appreciate the simplicity of these. So we want to reduce emissions, we want to help people deal with the impacts and build strategies for our communities. That makes sense, right?
protect the ecosystem.
Protect the ecosystem, yeah.
Yeah.
So we now have, we've sort of made a commitment to write this puppy. So now my question is, how do we proceed? It seems like we need, my suggestion, I think, is that we work maybe in task in subgroups together. But I don't know if that's the right thing. I wrote, an introduction because I finally figured out how to use the microphone at Microsoft, and I felt like dictate something. And I threw it in there into this doc, but we had some other things, so, but I'm clearly people are, I don't want to make people feel guilty, so let me start there. My question is, how do we proceed? And I'm confused, so I don't know the answer.
might be nice to have a skeleton that maybe we work on first and then I'll agree on that and then can flesh out the different parts as we go through. Yeah, so we did.
put some down, we have the background, and we have these, and, we have the focus areas that we were gonna look at.
So it might be good to get feedback on that skeleton and maybe have people suggest places that they might want to do.
And it comes down to who you think your audience is, right? If you want this to be sort of a compendium of all we've done, so you're okay with not very many people reading it, then we should hit all of those points, obviously. But and if you do that strategy, then it means that you're going to have sub pieces like for the website and for basically, you know, pamphlets around the city of the most important points on here that really address these two things that we just learned from the survey, which is people want to learn about minimizing their contribution to climate change and advocating for climate policy change, right? So if you do that, if you do those things with this lens, then basically what it means is that we probably have to hire a firm that specializes in communications or whatever, right?
Unless we can get some expertise from.
Yeah, of course, our community is our first opportunities, but it wouldn't be bad to have professionals. And I'm not saying there aren't professionals out there, but where, you know, professionals look over basically what we do to make sure that we're getting through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying that our document would maybe be the more complex one, and then we simplify it into these pamphlets
Right.
or distribution.
Right, and so for the folks that are new, the city council allocated, or the mayor's budget allocated 15,000 in the first year for this committee to spend however we choose to spend it, and 20,000 in the second year, let's say fiscal year 2024.
So we also did have in this document, the idea that we would have a huge, we have all sorts of ideas for an appendix at the back.
Yeah.
So this. It
Yeah.
feels like you can filter it a little bit that way by getting absolute detail
Mhm.
out of the main written part, but yeah, this would be a major document to read as a.
So I want to go back to I think our audience for this, let's talk about our audience. Isn't, who is our audience?
Like Forest Park community,
You have to talk about it.
Lake Forest Park community.
So not the council. That's not our target. I mean,
Well, seems like we want to get the government to do some things, right? Right. It may be that we have different,
I'm just saying it's perfectly okay if nobody reads this, but the pieces that we pull out of it to give to the council, to give to basically people at the farmers market, right, come from this, right?
it's like a library that
Right.
whole
Right.
aspect about it.
But that will inform how you write this, right? Because if this is supposed to be read by like lots and lots of people, you're probably gonna have a different language than if it's just, you know, we're pulling stuff from this, right?
Yeah.
So
It seems like we should have a web version that's accessible to people. If we do have this complex library backing.
Well, that's what the executive summary is for, right?
yeah. And
So,
I'm
yeah,
gonna-
we're not, I don't think very many people are gonna want to read a document this long.
I was
We're all executives at some point. We read the executive summary.
right.
So I was assuming that we would write the main text of the report as something that would certainly be read by council and might also be read by interested citizens. So pitching it at a, you know, completed high school may have had some college level, but completed high school level attention span and language level. And then the appendices are the technical details, and they can be whatever we want them to be. And very few people, only people who actually want to know how did we derive these priorities will go to the appendices. I would like, you know, any appendix that I prepare will be referenced, so you can find where my data come from and you can track my math, all the rest of it. But I'm assuming that, yeah, Matt's right. People read the executive summary, which should be something that can actually go on a website.
Mhm.
And a small number of additional people will read the core of the report. And one or two people may dig into one or two of the appendices.
Well, yeah, well, maybe we are talking about this phase of the climate action of us, the climate action committee, would be really more general than, and then phase two would be all those implementation pieces that we would in this document maybe describe what we see as the issue, and then take that out and say, we see the issue is, you know, transportation and buildings, and these are the basic things we think should happen, but not detail a whole level of it, and then take that out and get a consensus on that in both the community and with the council, and then come back and do. Because, you know, we all have 3-year terms. What are we going to do after we finish this?
Well, a lot of the implementation is going to be making certain that the city has the resources to do implementation,
Yeah.
which may tie more into accessing funds that are available through other communities, whether it be a county fund or a federal fund or something of this sort, where we can bring those resources to bear in our community. So some of this may well tie into legislation or outreach to our county commissioners.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
basis, the reason we're asking for a grant.
Talk about this a little more, but I don't know. Is this the right? Okay. I'm confused about how to, I just have to confess, I'm confused about how to move forward. What would you do tomorrow? Or what's the next step?
You've got a great outline.
Yeah.
And I think your plan of basically having smaller groups work on whatever section they feel more confident about working on. I mean, I think our data gathering phase, can we all agree, is more or less over? We'll do some like, you know, subsidiary kind of things that are suggested, but in terms of like getting more data, are we done?
What kind of data?
Any, really? I mean, do we need more demographic data? Do we need more emissions data? Do we need more consumption data? I mean, do we need any of that stuff?
Well, where is that data now?
If I can say something, so that's the one thing I'm working on. So what I'm working on is, all right, there's the whole thing of our meeting today with Sarah and I and the tree board meeting had some really interesting concepts for me, because I've been playing around with iTree, the software that the Forest Service developed to basically calculate carbon sequestering and carbon, you know, and all. So I'm working on. I think I'm going to double up with what they're doing, because they're doing something very different from what I'm doing, and I'm going to put together some better ideas about. And this may not be useful, but I'm just saying that I'm going to put together some data about how much LFP has as far as carbon sequestering capability in a different format than what they're doing. And I've already got stream data from what's happened over the last 20-30 years, showing how stream data temperatures are increasing. So I think this is all good stuff to kind of have information about why, you know, as we said, protecting these ecosystems is an incredibly important thing for mitigating a lot of what's going to happen with climate change and how we become more resilient. So I think there's going to be some uses for that. And I should be able to put something together in the next month or so, and I'll have that information up about. I'll just put all my data up there, and then we can kind of figure out what is it we want to keep, what is it we don't want to keep. But I think we could always use more data. I don't know if there's. It'd be interesting.
But I think we could develop it and say, we need to find this piece of information, right? I mean, is that right? Or does the data tell you what to write, or does You have a higher.
Yeah, the data kind of dictates what, I mean, the software I'm using will dictate what kind of data I use or I present. I don't have much control over that.
So what I heard was that somebody was volunteering, that is, say Brian,
Yeah.
for point 4 there.
And Linda did too.
Okay.
So anybody, yes, okay, thank you. Anybody interested in volunteering about waste? This is a smidgen of what we do, but
But I'm really interested in that, so yes.
but it has big community impact.
So I'm reaching out to our waste management services right now to get information on what's going on here. So if Tracy wants to take that on, Tracy, I'd love to work with you as a second pair of hands.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay. But Anne, we're putting you up here in buildings.
Yes, and I'm happy to take that on as a primary area of concern.
Okay, so now who else would like to jump in here and put their name somewhere? We have transportation, buildings, waste, environment.
This is Jessica. I'll do transportation.
Yay. Okay, we need somebody to work with Jessica.
I can.
Was that my daughter?
That'll be convenient.
Aw,
Okay. And their names up there.
I can help Anne with buildings.
Is that you, Matt?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna get my eyes pretty soon. Okay.
Thank
All
you, Matt.
Is there anybody who isn't assigned? You, Dana.
Well, I'm in there, but I wouldn't mind going in the environment with
Oh, good.
and
And, okay, so now, where would we just put, Mimi?
Well, the last one doesn't have anybody, I think.
is that,
Oh, no, there was, it's building adaptation, resilience. Yeah, where I was doing that.
No, let's put Dana in there. I mean, in there too. Well, it should move her around. Okay. And then maybe we come back all together and do this implementation as a group. Is that right? Okay, somebody's got a background there.
Or they're trying to talk.
Oh, they're trying to talk. If you're trying to talk louder. And so we need to, Bella too. Put Bella on, I don't know. Okay. All right, and so can I, all right, so what the next meeting is gonna be is we're gonna look over those goals again and see if we like them still. We're gonna get reports from each of these groups. So, and if there's any way that I can be helpful on any of these groups that you need something, let me know and I will be happy to do that. And I'll look around where some of these, I wrote some introductory materials, so they're in. And just stick it, and this is on a Google Doc, so you can just put stuff in there, and it's like sending your work to 7 teachers to protect and change your edit.
Do any of our volunteers, are you interested in working on this?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Only.
I'd love to be in the last committee if you guys need extra person there on the community adaptation. Yeah,
That's great. Thank you.
sure.
Great. Jump right in. We love this. Okay. All right. So now the last thing is you, Corey.
Excuse me, Sarah.
Yes.
Somebody is not muted and there's background noise that's making it difficult for me to hear the other speakers. So if you're not speaking and there's any background noise, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Can you mute that? Okay. Lost my mind.
Good. I mean, I think you were gonna basically ask what Corey was going to say.
No, yes, Green Fair.
Oh, April 29th.
Okay.
We'll be able, it'll be 10 to 2. We'll be able to do probably 3 like workshop presentations that day. One will definitely be on like recycling, we'll have the public services. I'm looking to do like a natural yard care, and then the third one, we can figure out what.
Cars, should be electricity, I mean, what people are interested in is.
I can barely hear her.
Okay, yes, she said the Green Fair is gonna be on April 29th. And what it is it's a city function, but we have an opportunity to be at the table, to set up a table.
Yeah, you guys will have a table.
So we can figure out what we want to say to people. There'll be an opportunity to, she's gonna do 3 workshops. One on recycling, one on natural. Yard care, and the third one, she's looking for some input on what might be good. And these would be just, I think, in the Stadler room, right? So they're small, they're 25 people, is what fits in the Stadler room, so.
Oh, yeah, but you want SRO, this will look good.
No, you can't hear.
Okay, fine. But
We'll get a microphone.
but the photo will look good.
The photo will look good, yeah, yeah, and we had good luck with an organization called Cultura that talked about the transition to electric vehicles. And you might want to look at that.
Do you have an idea for like what people would come to this?
I mean, I think that there's over a couple hundred that come. I mean, that have come in the past. So this is
And
the
each-
first year after
Yeah.
2 years hiatus. It'll be the weekend after Green or Earth Day and Arbor Day too, maybe, but
And the tables would be upstairs in the commons up there.
yeah, there's usually like we can fit about 20 booths, and
I
it's
just wonder if you could use the stage there as the place where presentations would be, and then move the tables. Maybe so you have upstairs and downstairs or something. We use the downstairs for other things.
yeah, I'll talk to Amy and see what she says about
Well, that would be great, because then your presentations would be theoretically to more.
Yeah,
people.
if you're limiting to 25 people going in.
And instead of being a you just spread them out.
yeah.
And there's the curtain, so you could block off that a little bit, maybe you can still have tables out there.
Yeah.
So.
So allied to that point, swag, what do we give away as a committee? I'm assuming we have a table,
Yes,
right?
we give away data.
It's a data.
Yeah, the giveaways too, like I have grant money for stuff, so.
Sustainable giveaways that aren't plastic.
Yes,
Right.
Agree.
yeah.
Or,
So
yeah,
much.
useful things too that aren't. Yeah,
That's what I try to do.
Yeah, they once gave glass bowls.
I didn't have a bunch to give away this time.
Are
So-
we going to have access to any part of the parking lot? Could we invite, for instance, if Cultura could bring an electric vehicle?
Ooh.
Well, let's see, yeah,
Sort of an outdoor, I'm just thinking if the weather hopefully won't be terrible, but even if it were, we could have a pop-up canopy. And just have an opportunity for people to see and discuss electric vehicles with people who actually know what they're talking about and aren't trying to sell any particular electric vehicle. Can be really engaging because people feel like they can ask any question they want and get an honest answer without having to go to a car dealer.
That gets tricky, cause I know the parking lot, like each business, I think, has like sections of the lot, and so.
But
They
City
could be at
Hall might,
City Hall.
has a few spots, and maybe if we could corral a corner of City Hall's parking lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, that's kind of a far walk.
but you could see if you had a, because you could invite people to bring their electric cars.
Right.
or bicycles.
Yes, or.
Yeah, electric bicycles.
So
That place here.
Yeah, some of you have been around here a while. I vaguely recall seeing a car being parked right by the bottom of the escalator inside the mall. You know, and it was like for a commercial purpose, but still, I vaguely recall that, and that would be kind of a good spot, right?
How would you get it in?
Well, they got it, that one in, so clearly there's a way to get it in.
Take the doors off.
I'm gonna say we're probably not gonna get.
Okay. That's a thought.
Those bicycles, we could have like people who have a bicycle could bring theirs and compare them or something.
Yes, we could show off our bikes or put it up in the bike store.
Yeah, get the guy from the bike store.
Anyhow, we can have a planning session for this that, you know, gets into more detail, but it's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah.
Is the
So-
league planning any kind of an Earth Day gathering this year, or are the efforts combining into the Green Fair?
We're not,
Okay,
no. We had hoped that this, you know, yeah, but we're thinking about, the Climate Action Committee is brainstorming this notion of doing a lecture series or a presentation series. Saturdays, you know, where we were talking to the tree board. We were talking to the tree board and they were, you know, maybe they could make a presentation about trees and that it would just, but we're trying to figure out if it would be in person or on video or if be through the commons. So we need to think about that. So if you want to be on a subcommittee to look at this, we should contact Corey, right? And you'll set up a meeting?
For the Green Fair?
Yeah,
Sure,
people who want to help you.
sure.
Anybody want to be on that committee besides Ann?
thanks, folks.
Yeah, yeah. I'll join you, Ann. Okay, so Ann and I, and actually, Sally Yamasaki would like to help too. As a volunteer. Okay, anything else for the good of the order?
Next meeting?
The next meeting is March.
7?
I don't know.
Well,
Yeah,
February.
28 days,
Right,
yes.
yeah, exactly. Okay.
So March 7th.
Okay.
March 7th. Okay, and the agenda there is look over the goals, see where we've progressed with our writing and see where we are. I want to thank Tanya for coming and jumping right in. Yes, and Matt for making that presentation for that. I find that tool very hard, but I felt like I had enough confidence to look at it again. And I also wanted to report that Brian and I did meet with the tree people, the tree board, just sort of telling them what we were doing and sharing insights. We didn't make any. That's my report, right? Do you have something there, Brian?
What, I didn't hear what you said. What'd you say?
I said the tree board, you and I and Sally met with 2 people from the tree board.
Well, what was your assessment? Did you give an assessment?
I said, we just talked about things.
Oh, you talked about things.
I'm looking for common.
I think that pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, they're very smart people making progress on their trees. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Great meeting, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you for coming.
Bye,
Yeah,
Sarah.
nice meeting you,
Thanks.
Tanya.
Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming. Nice meeting you.
Absolutely. Nice to meet you.
Do we take